Gilmore. I'm the Administrative Commissioner from New York, and I'll be chairing the board meeting today. I'm taking over from the last 2 years from Doug Grout, who did a fine job of leading us through some difficult waters on striped bass, but we still have more work to do, so thank you, Doug. First order of business is to approve the agenda. The agenda is in the briefing packages that you received. Are there any changes to the agenda from the board? Seeing none, will we adopt those as approved? Second order of business is to approve the proceedings from the November 2015 meeting. Are there any changes to those proceedings? All right, seeing none, we will adopt those as approved. Before each one of our meetings, we have a session for public comment, and I understand we have quite a few folks in the room. I got a couple of names I wanted to make some comments on, and this would be public comments on issues not on the agenda. We're going to be discussing several topics later on, particularly with the Chesapeake. So this is an opportunity to make some comments on issues that aren't on the agenda yet, and I would like to acknowledge that we have a group of folks from the Maryland Charter Boat Association today. Welcome, gentlemen. You'll get to see the process in motion. I do have two names that would like to make some public comments, so we'll go to those right now. First, Phil Langley from the Maryland Charter Boat Association. Phil, if you'd go up to the public mic.
Good morning. My name's Phil Langley. I'm president of the Maryland Charter Boat Association. I sit on the Potomac River Fisheries Commission and also the Maryland Sport Fish Advisory Commission. On behalf of myself and a group of charter boat captains that came up this morning, many of them traveled 4 hours to be here this morning. So these guys are pretty dedicated to make this meeting this morning. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the board for the opportunity to speak this morning. I would also like to thank all of you for your dedication in protecting our resource and to ensure that we have a sustainable fishery now and well into the future. Like you, we have a passion for preserving the resource. We realize without it, our professions would not exist. I appreciate that there are very tough decisions being made that affect the fisheries and ultimately the livelihoods of many in all of our states. With that being said, the species affected by those decisions impact our states differently. The striped bass is a fish that has an enormous impact on the fishery in the Chesapeake Bay. Unlike most coastal states, we don't have a large variety of alternative species to target. By having a larger selection of fish to target, it's good, especially during times of reduction, as it provides options for the for-hire fleet to focus on and provide to their customers, therefore lessening the economic burden caused by reductions. To put this in perspective, MRIP data shows that roughly 50% of the Chesapeake Bay's for-hire fleet focuses primarily on striped bass as a primary target, compared to roughly half that from a lot of the coastal states. The slot option elected last year in our spring coastal fishery, combined with the large 2011 year class growing slower than anticipated, resulted in reductions much greater than the mandated 25% in the spring harvest and the 20.5% mandated in the fall-summer season. This resulted in fewer trips being run by the charter fleet, causing a huge economic impact for the for-hire fleet. The impacts to the 2016 season is unknown at this time. However, there is great concern over how 2016 reductions will impact the livelihood of the Bay's for-hire fleet, as well as many small businesses, hotels, restaurants, shops that are dependent on this fishery. As the board moves forward, I ask that you please consider the effects to the states that may feel the greatest economic impact to these reductions in the future, and provide flexibility to permit these states to achieve the required reductions while minimizing the economic impact. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Phil. Next, I have Robert T. I'm sorry, I can't make out the last name from Brown? Robert T. Brown, thank you.
Robert T. Brown, President of the Maryland Watermen's Association. Thank you for letting me speak today. In our association, we only have not only have netters, but we got hook and liners, and we got a big commercial fleet of charter boats that do it. The slot limit was very disastrous to us last year. However, I would like to thank the Striped Bass Management Board and any of the members who are present for the Policy Board for the consideration and approval of Maryland's requests for the assessment update in 2016. We do have a very important striped bass fishery in the state of Maryland, and want to thank you for all your efforts and giving us a chance to help get back on track. Also, we have in our fishery, our watermen average age is probably about close to 60 years old. And a lot of the things we do, it takes 3 years to get back on track. That's just how long it takes for this process to go through. Our watermen don't have many 3 years segments left. Once you get 60, then you're 63. I'm 66. I don't have too many 3-year, 10 years left. Hopefully we can get this turned around some. We also heard a phrase all the time that it is not being overfished, and overfishing has not occurred. And it seems like the sword only has one edge, but it's supposed to have two. It can be cut off real quick, but it seems like it takes a long time to get it back. And I know it's a hard job for you all to do because you have a lot of information you have to take in. We've been fortunate enough that in 2013 we had a young of the year index of 11, and then last year it was double the normal. It was 24.2. And with these young of the year index coming in at such a high rate, that shows that we do have a good spawning stock out there. And you know, it's conditions into the rivers that make this spawning stock fertilize and come into the young of the year index. And the water quality is really one of the main problems that we have. Right now, Virginia Dominion Power has been granted a permit to drain some fly ash ponds off of Quantico Creek, right where our breeding ground is, or where they spawn at the rockfish and many other fish. They'll be dumping possibly 215 million gallons of water out of these ash ponds, and they contain selenium, cadmium, arsenic, and a host of other metals. And for the past 30 years, they have discovered, excuse me, they have discovered that there's been a toad drain in one of these ponds, and that has been filtering in. And that has to do with the water quality we have in the Potomac River. And we're very concerned about that. And it has been appealed at this time. We don't know what the status will be. But that was just more or less an update on. It's more than just management, it's water quality. And when the water quality and conditions are right, our stocks come back. Look at 1982, how low our spawning stock was, and that started us back. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other comments before we move on to the next agenda from the public? Okay, seeing none, we're going to get into our next agenda item, which is we need to reconsider the tabled motions from our November meeting. We're going to put those up on the board area, also in your briefing packages. So first we'll just open us up to any comments we may have on this. Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak here. So I know that we need to take action today on the two motions that are on the board. And when I think back to November when we all convened at our annual meeting in Florida, these motions were heavily debated. There was a lot to it. We had just received information regarding an update to the striped bass stock assessment, for which terms like retrospective bias and others were presented, and I believe that the board at that time, started to look at what, I truly believe that there was a feeling around the board that maybe what we did as a result of Addendum 4, maybe we know a little bit more now than we did when we made those decisions, and that this update to the stock assessment was a first sign at a recovery, or maybe I should say it as it was a showing that the stock was not as in the condition that we once thought, and that things were they were beginning to turn around. So there were a lot of board members around the table that agreed with the motion to reconsider and to go back and revisit Addendum 4 to look at whether or not the 25% reduction along the coast and the 20.5% reduction in the Chesapeake Bay were reasonable at the time, given that what we understood at the time back in November, and I'm not going to deviate from that, but the impact, especially to the fishermen in Maryland, was tremendous last year. Charter boat captains, commercial fishermen, and recreational anglers all felt the impacts of the rules that were set forth in Addendum 4. And so, while I feel that we made really good progress at that time, when these motions were tabled, it kind of, I personally lost sight of any type of relief or any type of change in 2016. So, I just thought I'd take a moment to remind the board that once the motions were tabled, we began thinking about, okay, how can we now use this information that has been brought to light and consider that information for a future year or a future time. And so we discussed an assessment update. The assessment update in 2016 there'll be some reflection there, we hope, showing that the changes that we made as a result of Addendum 4 had impact on fishing mortality and spawning stock biomass. And the 2016 assessment update was not planned. There was no plan to have an update, and the board chair at the time spoke of the next update being in 2018 or even 2019, depending on timing. So, I do want to thank the board. I do want to thank the policy committee, as well as Mr. Brown stated, for approving an assessment update for the future and for this year. And I think that information will, again, as it did last year, it will provide us information that we can use, the best available science to use for management for 2017 or beyond. So I would like to make a motion regarding these two tabled motions that we're looking at on the board today. And that motion is going to reflect the commitment that the state of Maryland made and other Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions made at the time to, I guess I could say, let's use the word, to postpone the effort that we were putting into asking this board to consider changes to the regulations that were in place for Addendum 4 in 2016. We committed back in November to holding off on that pursuit in the event that the board approved the assessment update. The board did approve the assessment update, so I feel committed at this time in thanking the board and moving forward to making a motion which reflects that commitment of the jurisdictions in the Chesapeake Bay, which will postpone any action on these motions. However, I don't want that postponement to be viewed by the board or by the members of the audience here today, or anyone listening on the webinar, that this is some way of just saying we're no longer interested. I think it's absolutely clear in just looking at the room today and given the testimony by Phil Langley about the interest and the passion of the fishermen of Maryland and the interest that they have in doing what's right and managing the Chesapeake Bay population of striped bass in a responsible way. It's clear today, just looking in the crowd, that there are, and this is just a fraction of the membership and a fraction of those who are interested that could make it in here today. So with all of that said, I think that we still have we have a lot to look forward to. There's a 2016 assessment update that we will receive fully by late summer, early fall, which will provide us the guidance as managers, the most up-to-date and the best available science at the time to consider changes for 2017 and beyond. And with that said today, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to postpone indefinitely the two options on the board.
I have a second to that motion. John Clark.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up with that. I want to make sure that it's clear what the postponement, that my understanding of a postponement indefinitely means that we will essentially raise these motions up into what a colleague yesterday referred to as the cloud, and it will hang there, and it could be drawn down at any time, or it could stay there forever. We also could consider the same question or a similar question yet differently worded at a future meeting. And that would be my intention, would be to just hold off on taking any official action here today so that we could consider these same types of options for the future. Thank you.
Understood, Mike, and we agree with that. Remind the board that this is a non-debatable motion. It's just to essentially postpone, so we will not have any discussion on this. I'll give everybody 30 seconds to caucus. Oh, is this a question of order? All right, Dennis Abbott.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Do we have to do each motion separately, I believe, as we did when we made them?
Mike, that was your intent to cover both motions. Do you want to perfect that somewhat and add in for both Maryland and Delaware? Because there was two motions, one that was put up by for the Chesapeake Bay from Maryland, and there was a second one put up the Chesapeake Bay from Delaware.
Yeah, I mentioned that the two motions on the board, one from, we could perfect that to say one from Mr. Louisi, parentheses Maryland, one from Mr. Clark, parentheses Delaware, something to that effect.
That good, Dennis? I'll give 30 seconds to caucus, and then we'll take the vote. Okay, I think we're ready. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 15. All those opposed? 1. Rhode Island's is voting.
Voted in favor.
No. Those against? Any null votes? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion is approved. 16-0-0-0. Okay, thanks for that. Let's move on to our next agenda item, which is to consider conservation equivalency management proposals from Maryland. We're going to start with that. Max Applebaum's going to do a presentation on Maryland's proposals. Max.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to sort of tag team this PowerPoint with Mark Robson, chair of the LEC, or commission staff for the LEC. So two proposals were submitted. The first one did receive full TC review and LEC review, and that was included in your meeting materials. The second one was handed out just before this meeting that received TC review but did not get formal comment from the LEC. So I'll give a brief overview of the conservation equivalency process and then touch on the first proposal from Maryland and PRFC, cover TC comment and LEC comment. Well, Mark will cover the LEC comment for that proposal, and then we'll loop back around to the second proposal. I think that's easiest to follow this in chronological order. So in Addendum 4, it essentially states that states can submit alternative regulations that are conservationally equivalent to regulations approved in Addendum 4 for board review and approval. And those proposals must demonstrate through quantitative analysis that they meet, that they are conservationally equivalent to and achieve the required reduction in harvest. So that is a 25% reduction for coastal fisheries and a 20.5% reduction for Chesapeake Bay fisheries. And those proposals are subject to TC and LEC review for board consideration. And to that point, the TC did develop criteria for Addendum 4 conservation equivalency proposals, detailed in Memo 14-110, and the LEC does have a document out detailing their guidelines for enforceability. So from the first proposal, these options have all been taken either directly from draft Addendum 4 that went out for public comment, or were previously approved by the TC and the management board prior to implementation in 2015. So all these options up on the board have been reviewed, and none of them are new options to Maryland or PRFC. So there was one option that was new to Maryland in the first proposal, and that is a 2-fish bag limit at 28 to 38 inch slot size or 44-inch minimum size, and that's for their coastal fishery, recreational fishery. This option was adopted from Delaware's regulations. I believe this is the current regulation for Delaware. And I think the main purpose for proposing this option was that Maryland coastal anglers kind of requested that regulations be consistent between these jurisdictions, noting that Maryland's coastal area is relatively small and, as we know, is adjoining Delaware's coastal region. So this has been approved for use in Delaware. It's been adopted in this proposal for use in Maryland, but it has not yet been approved for use in Maryland. So PRFC's proposal is rather straightforward, and it is simply to implement whatever regulations that Maryland implements in the Bay for their summer, fall, and trophy fisheries. And so PRFC requested the TC's approval to match those regulations implemented by Maryland. So on behalf of the TC, I'll cover their comments. As I stated, all but one of the options had been previously reviewed and approved by the technical committee, and the technical committee was very comfortable with Maryland's justification and analysis for adopting Delaware's regulations for their coastal fishery. And so with that, the TC approved both Maryland's and PRFC's proposals with consensus. And I'll hand over the mic to Mark for LEC comment.
Thank you, Max, and Mr. Chairman. It's pretty much been covered already, so I'll be very brief. But basically, in looking at this additional proposal, the Law Enforcement Committee was meeting in teleconference on January 7th and was able to provide good input on this. And we support this particular conservation equivalency proposal, particularly because it's providing for better consistency in regulations among some very close jurisdictional areas. And that's a concept that we fully support. It meets with our guidelines for enforceability, and it makes good sense. There was just a related discussion. I'll just very briefly point out that in thinking about having these consistent regulations, particularly a slot limit, questions were asked among the Law Enforcement Committee members about their specific language on how fish are measured. And so it was just some general thought and guidance that states may want to review with their law enforcement personnel, and if necessary, even clarify fish measurement procedures for consistency among these jurisdictions. So, you know, if the language describes whether pinching the tail is allowed or not, and just specifically how that fish is measured. It's important with slot measurements because you can have a little bit of slop either at the lower end or the upper end, depending on how those fish are handled. And so some tightening of any language or regulations is certainly worth looking at if it's necessary. And that was really the gist of the comments from the Law Enforcement Committee, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mark. Max?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mark. So just to finish up with this presentation, there was a second round of a proposal submitted by Maryland, and that had two new options to consider. These are in addition to the options that we just showed you, that we just covered. The first option, and let me back up a second, the TC was able to review these in time. The LEC was not, and Mark might fill in a little bit to that point. So the TC reviewed both these options. For the first option, for the spring trophy fishery, it was a one fish bag limit at 35-inch minimum size, and the TC had no concerns with this option, and they approved that option with consensus. When it came to the second option, they were unable to make any recommendations based on the information that was brought to them at that time, and requested that Maryland conduct further analysis with those options. Following that analysis, the option did not meet the requirements for harvest reduction and was removed from the proposal, and so is no longer being considered. If Mark has anything to add about the LEC's comment on the first option, please feel free. I didn't think so. Okay. So just to wrap it all up, these are all the options that are being proposed. Only two of them are new, one for the coastal, one for the spring trophy, and I'm just going to leave these up on the board for you guys to consider. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Max. All right, do we have any questions for either Max or Mark on the presentations? Wow, you guys did a great job. Oh, sorry, Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Law Enforcement Committee, a question, please. You mentioned the compression or the handling of the tail as being an issue that needs to be clarified, whether we're going to be consistent with that or not. Are there any other issues in the measurement that are currently confusing to the public or complicating for our team of people?
Well, just to be clear, this was not an issue that was raised as a concern regarding these proposals. It was just a kind of an additional amount of comment from law enforcement experts that states may want to look at their specific language. The example came from Florida, where there was formerly language that, you know, indicated you measure the fish with natural eye. This apparently created lots of problems for how that fish is exactly measured. So things, as long as it's clear, you know, how the fish is to be measured, whether the tail is pinched or not, you know, it's just something to look at. It's not really an issue that was pointed out as a concern or a problem for this particular fishery. But if you're looking at slot limits, it's just something to look at, and perhaps the Law Enforcement Committee can just take a look at the comparative state languages at the next meeting and bring back any issues if there are any. But it's not a major concern.
Other questions? Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused about what I'm seeing on the boards. The 36 inches has been changed to 35. That's the new proposal. I see that. But down at the bottom it has 18 inches and it has 2 fish, that is the existing regulation, is it not, rather than what are the previous regulation, rather than what is in force now? Or should it be 1 fish? Can I get some clarification on what that should be? Because our document that was handed out for the meeting lists 18 inches and 1 fish. Thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out. That is a typo on my end. That should be 1 fish bag limit at 18-inch minimum.
We'll flog Max later. Any other questions for Max or Mark? All right, seeing none, if we're going to adopt these, we're going to need a motion. So, Mike Louisi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I make my motion, I do want to say thank you to the technical committee and staff that worked very quickly on the turnaround on this, what we've been calling the second proposal that we submitted. This proposal was a result of a collaboration with the Department of Natural Resources and the charter boat industry, and it was an attempt to look at some ways to be somewhat more, a little more creative in our approach, to provide some flexibility so that the businesses that have really felt the impact of the reductions that we've taken could find their path through 2016, given that there was no relief coming in the form of board action to provide that relief. So thanks again. Just for board members, just to understand that the option that provided the choice that we've been referring to as the captain's choice option that did not meet technical committee standards was the information just became available due to the timing of how this all came through. So, but it did not meet the 20.5% reduction, and therefore that's why we've removed it from our proposal for board consideration. So again, thank you, and if you're ready, I do have a motion. I believe somebody has helped me craft one, and I'll read it if I can see it on the board, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mike, let's just get that up. And go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I'd like to move to approve conservation equivalency proposal options from Maryland and PRFC that meet the required reduction in Addendum 4 as recommended by the TC and presented today.
Second. Second from Rob O'Reilly. Any discussion on the motion? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a comment that on the coastal regulations that in Maryland it could be a case of the grass is always greener. Delaware anglers made it clear they wanted a 2-fish option, so we did the calculations and came up with that slot. But we've had quite a few complaints that all that anglers are catching are fish that they can't keep. They're in that slot, and almost as though we had a fiendish plot in mind when we came up with these regulations. So just a little warning.
Thanks, John. Yeah, our plan is to take whatever's approved today back to our stakeholders and have that discussion before we were to implement anything.
Other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment that anyone would like to make on the motion, just simply on the motion itself from the audience? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any last comments before we go to a vote? Do we need a caucus on this? Doesn't look like it. So is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt this as unanimously approved. That brings us up to our next agenda item, which is the update of the 2016 Cooperative Winter Tagging Program. And Dr. Laney is going to give us an update on that. Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me be sure I thank our funding sources that are funding both the trawling cruise as well as the hook and line cruises this year, and those are matching grants from the Salt and Salt Kennedy program, from the National Marine Fisheries Service, and from a North Carolina Coastal Recreational Fishing License grant. So if it weren't for those two grants, we wouldn't be doing this work. I also want to thank all of our partners who supplied scientists for the scientific party aboard the research vessel Savannah this year. There were 3 of us from the Fish and Wildlife Service. We had 1 from the National Marine Fisheries Service Pascagoula Lab. We had 2 folks from the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries. We had Ryan Hastings from the Maryland DNR Fisheries Service, and Matt Balazic from Virginia Commonwealth, Chuck Bangley from East Carolina, and I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. There were 12 of us in total, but thanks for all of those folks and for their agencies who approved them attending and participating. So the trawling component of the operation took place between January 6th and 19th. Weather was a big factor. We wound up sitting at the dock for 3 days at Duke Marine Lab and then anchored up off Wallops Island, Virginia for a while because sea conditions and wind conditions were just made things too challenging for us to work on the back deck. We also had a few ship issues that caused us some lost time. We did, however, complete 104 sample sites. We collected data on multiple ASMFC species. We filled a lot of linked bins for biological samples for kingfishes, weakfish, spot, croaker, sheep's head, a number of other species, as well as taking data on everything that we caught this year, down to the last bay anchovy. We had a difficult time finding striped bass this year because, as most of you are aware, I think the water temperatures are extremely warm. We had to go all the way north into Maryland waters for the first time ever, and thanks to Harry Hornick and all the Maryland folks, and thankfully we had Ryan on board, so we were able to get authorization to go ahead and sample in Maryland waters. So we did manage to find striped bass. We tagged and released 110, which is, I think, the lowest number in the time series, but again, it's a function of the fact that the RV Savannah doesn't travel as fast as some other vessels, and we did lose a lot of time due to the weather. So that's the short summary on the trawling component of the cruise. Now, the hook and line component, and I have to give credit here to Charlton Godwin from the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries. Charlton has been running that program for us for a number of years now, does a great job coordinating that and implementing it. Those trips are being run aboard the fishing vessel Midnight Sun out of Rudy Inlet, Virginia, once again this year, and we are able to be more flexible with that contract. We cover a broader period of time, and so we're able to have a lot of weather days built into that and schedule 10 trips sometime during the interval all the way through February 29th this year, but I think we're going to complete those trips earlier than that. So I'm very pleased to report that on those trips thus far, and I believe we've made 6, we have managed to tag, or Charlton and the crew have managed to tag 670 total striped bass. So we're up to a total of 780, and we're hoping to break 1,000. And Dr. Duvall may want to say something about the fact that I understand she participated in one of the 200-plus day trips and tagged 225 striped bass with Charlton's assistance on that particular trip. So we're really appreciative for her efforts in that regard. She tagged almost a third of the total striped bass that we've tagged on the hook and line trips so far. So I know some of you have had a chance to get out on some of those trips. I would encourage you, if you haven't made one, to get out there and do it. I've made some last year. I haven't been on one this year, but I like to go out and take the data. And they did make me reel in a couple of stripers. They use parachute rigs with double lures on them, so sometimes you're reeling in 2 30-pound fish. And I understand on the last trip, I guess, where we got 64, they got into 50 and 60-pound fish. So that was really an experience. So you will notice I haven't said where exactly we found the fish, and I'm not going to. The U.S. Coast Guard and NOAA law enforcement folks want us to downplay the location of these fish, but I will tell you they're in the EEZ. So from an enforcement perspective, from a protection of your spawning stock winter aggregation, the fish are relatively protected now because they are spending a lot of time in the EEZ. It seems like for the last 4 or 5 years they've gone progressively further north and progressively further offshore. So that's my report, Mr. Chairman. There'll be detailed analysis coming later. And I will just say one other thing, and that is that as of the moment, we don't have funding for future operations. There are some options under discussion for the hook and line. I'm very optimistic that program will get funded. I've talked to Pat Campfield, and I think with regard to the trawling program, we'll have some further discussion of that at the Joint Assessment Science and Management and Science Committee's meeting, which is coming up in April. So we'll keep you posted on where those discussions go, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Wilson. Great report, and if you ever need any help, give me a call. It's been many years since I've tagged fish, but I'd love to do it again. Michelle, do you want to add anything to your date with the striped bass?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would definitely encourage any board members who haven't had the opportunity to get out to go. I know this year was a little bit tough. I was scheduled to go on the first couple of trips that had to be postponed, but it's very interesting, challenging when you're searching for the fish and are having to go further than you think you might need to get there. And I mean, the one thing I'll add to what Wilson said is that on the trip that I was on, we actually had a lot of big fish, but we also had a surprising number of small males that came through as well. So it was interesting to see those guys out there. But for the most part, it was just the ladies receiving their new jewelry. So it was fun. Get out there.
Great, thanks. Questions for Wilson? Okay, seeing none, thanks a lot, Wilson, and keep up the good work. Our last agenda item is we're going to need to elect a vice chair because I'm all alone up here. So if we can have someone has a nomination, the floor is open. Marty Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to nominate as vice chairman for the Atlantic Striped Bass Management Board, Mr. Russ Allen from the state of New Jersey.
We have a second, Pat Augustine. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we move forward with this nomination. This is wonderful. Close nominations and cast one vote for Mr. Russ Allen as Vice President of the Atlantic Striped Bass Management Board. Russ, congratulations.
Thanks, Pat. Was that Vice President or Vice Chairman?
Vice President, no, Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the promotion there.
Congratulations, Russ. Welcome aboard. We're just down to other business now. Is there any other business to come before the Striped Bass Board? Bill Goldsboro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if staff could give us any indication on the timetable we can expect for the update assessment this year.
Sure. Compliance reports are submitted in mid-June, June 15th, I believe to be exact. So as soon as that information is in, the Stock Assessment Subcommittee can go to work on putting all that information together, and generally on a schedule for a stock assessment update that is available for board review at the November meeting. I think that's the earliest that we could get that done.
Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Max. You know, as we all know, timing is critical to things that we do, and given that this is a turn of the crank, and you know, it's not a benchmark assessment, I would urge my counterparts in the other states who are providing information for this update to do everything you could possibly do to get that information in, so that the staff can work on, you know, turning this crank and generating that update. You know, I think as far as timing, if there's some possibility of achieving an August meeting report, it would be beneficial, just considering that the updated report may begin the discussion again that we had last year about considerations for 2017, and given the timing of meetings, it would just be helpful. So I just, you know, want to put that on the record. Thank you.
Good comments, Mike. Any other business before the board? I have a motion to adjourn. So move second. Okay, I'd just like to make a final thanks to the Maryland fishermen for coming out and hope to see you at future meetings. Thank you. We are adjourned.
We're going to try to start the Winter Flounder Board about 15 minutes early, so